fact of the matter is that our state of biodiversity and nature is at risk. As the Gupta review says, and as planetary boundaries tell us, we are decreasing our natural capital on which we are dependent, in particular biodiversity dimension, climate dimension, and nutrient use dimension are of significant and particular concern. And sadly, but that's the reality, agriculture plays an important role in all of those boundaries, which means that there's an opportunity here, which climate farmers and many others, all of our speakers included, and the organizations are trying to get us to leverage, to unlock. That opportunity is the following. Since the Industrial Revolution, we human beings, all of us, including me, have emitted greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, which make up so-called carbon debt that is out there in the atmosphere, which, if we want to maintain a stable climate in which we can do business, have fun, and thrive, needs to be taken out of the atmosphere. And agricultural soil is one of the key vehicles through which that can happen. And a narrative of 4 per 1,000 or cut per meal initiative launched at COP21 in Paris, or CASH, Coalition of Action for Soil Health, launched with the UN Food System Summit that has concluded in its initial stage last year, tell that in much more detail. So this is precisely what I've said. We need to get to carbon negativity. So it's very much about reducing our emissions as much as we can, but simultaneously, we need to draw down that carbon debt from the atmosphere. Great news is we can do that in numerous pathways, or following numerous pathways. So it's not only about climate neutrality or emission neutrality, it can be very much about just transition, about building resilience of agricultural systems and economy. Otherwise, we all know what's the reality we are in, right? Like, we as farmers, and I am a farmer, so I can speak from that perspective, are experiencing severe weather events, both in terms of droughts and extreme floods or rainfall events. And those are increasing. Also, there's a set of man-made factors, like sadly the war in Ukraine currently, that are really impacting where we are in terms of food system, national security, and climate as well, which once agriculture, or regenerative agriculture as we like to call it, offers a very important, or proves to be a very important solution to this reality, or answer to this reality, as it builds carbon, which for us is a proxy for healthy and living agricultural soil. It's much more than carbon, but carbon is the starting point. It's about biodiversity or reversal of erosion, once again, to protect the soil we have and maintain this agricultural and other resilience. However, in order for this wonderful reality to scale, to happen across, from climate farmers' perspective, European Union, but also from our partners' perspective across the world, in both developed and developing, there's a need for essential infrastructure that is missing. And we as climate farmers build that infrastructure on both industry and policy level to transition regenerative agriculture, or to advance regenerative agriculture at scale. One particular tool we do that through are our Carbon Plus agricultural credits, which are described at the website, and you are invited to contact Philip at climatefarmers.org in order to find out more about that particular infrastructure piece that we are building. So, so this is the reality, this is the challenge, and there's also opportunity. And as I've said, Carbon Plus credits are a way of a very particular way for us of addressing this missing gap in the market. It's not a silver bullet, but from our understanding of the world right now, it is one of the key levers we can use in order to bridge the gap or advance advanced conversation in that gap. And in our conversation today, we'll get into how to get this relationship between company and landowner right. I will be wrapping up my presentation very soon, but only to reinforce the point I've been making so far, which is that it is very much about carbon and it is very much about getting to net zero. But if we focus only on that, we are losing the point, and we've been talking about that extensively in our previous think tanks, so-called associated benefits of carbon capture, or what we've argued in our previous think tanks. Maybe we shouldn't be thinking about those only as associated benefits, as something that has to be achieved in order for those carbon credits to be generated. And that taps into numerous of those challenges I've mentioned and many, many, many others. There is a real risk, and that's why I'm doing my work at policy level. That's why we are organizing those think tanks. That's why we are doing a lot of other work, and we are actively participating in global dialogues and discussions with, once again, this transition pathway. And that risk is real. Our thesis here being engagement with the regulation and regulation of voluntary carbon markets is a big opportunity for farmers as we see it. The question is how this path is being navigated, and this is one of the areas in which climate farmers work. With that, I am looking forward to listening to people who have more interesting stories to tell than I do. And we'll turn over to our wonderful panel. So once again, Elodie, Megan, Tobias, and Marine, welcome. You have pioneered the space of quantifying true costs and values of agriculture with your company, Soil and More. What was the space like when you started, and what would you say has changed in the meantime?
Yeah, first of all, the space has changed. That's to start with, and maybe I share with you a very quick story from my time back in Egypt. Sorry, did you hear me the last few seconds? Because my mic was okay.
You did,
yeah. Before I started Soil and More 15 years ago, I worked, as you said, in Egypt, in Sekem, on an organic farm, and I was responsible for the cultivation of fruits and vegetables and for the exports. And we tried to be really the good guys, like being organic, even biodynamic certified, fair trade, everything. And our clients, many retail chains in Europe and UK, loved us for that. And they blessed us with lots of questionnaires, sustainability assessments, and we did all this. And they promised, if you do this and this assessment and this questionnaire, you're going to be our biggest hero. So we did it. And then when it came to the shipment, they said, sorry, Tobias, to tell you, really sorry. And thanks that you did all this, and please send pictures. But your neighbor, who is actually doing nothing of it, but he unfortunately is 2 cents cheaper, so we're going to buy from him. And that created sort of an frustration in me, and this is a bit like also how the space was back then. So the organics were upset that they actually can't capitalize on the benefits they produce, and people say, okay, organic is not too expensive, but conventional too cheap. We need to include externality. So a lot of frustration, us versus them, good versus bad, you know. But there was a need to say, okay, we need to fix that cost thing. So as long as the cheapest wins, we don't really need to talk about sustainability. And then, like, probably as one big change back in June or July 2016, when the Capitals Coalition was founded and the Natural Capital Protocol was launched in London by the big four, KPMG, EY, Pricewaterhouse, and Deloitte. That sort of changed a bit, because all of a sudden there was this new group of allies, banks, financial auditors, insurances, who said, hang on a minute, there is something like natural capital. This is real. This is not just a market trend. Carbon is a risk to supply chains. Water scarcity, is a risk to supply chains. And this is a bit how I feel today. We are not there yet, but there's a lot of pressure because people realize, it's like sustainable regenerative agriculture is not an option. Yeah, it's a must, because everything else is too expensive purely economically. That's a bit how I feel it. So it's a lot of tailwind to push us, lots of requests from interesting companies, organizations. And I mean, who would have thought that financial auditors are the biggest supporters of compost and regenerative agriculture? So they love it because it reduces climate risk. And that's maybe in a nutshell how I saw the transition of the last 10 years.
There you go. Thank you for sharing those insights, very clear and great to hear. This is how you see the change. Marine, over to you right now. You have observed this development that Tobias mentioned from within a large corporation, Danone, that you work with right now. How do you see the conversation around food systems have developed? How do you see it? Where do you see us standing today?
So I would very much echo what Tobias just said, where we are seeing a groundswell right now to, on one hand side, get pressure to internalize some of the negative externalities. We see that through reduction in livestock, paying for nitrogen, carbon markets, many other signals, I would call them signals that we have right now. And on the other hand side, we see that the regulatory environment starts to team up. The formation of the ISSB, which hopefully will come out with a accountancy standard for ESG reporting. And then I think also thirdly, which is very important, is we see the carbon market, but we also see examples like the formation of the Intrinsic Exchange Group together with New York Stock Exchange, announcing a new asset class that enables you to monetize ecosystem services, potential for farmland and also for forest land, restorative land. The UN has the UN Decade, which has a specific finance task force. So I think there's a shift and that is growing. There's a groundswell. We're far from it today. So there's still a lot that needs to be done. And in general, I think on one hand side, we need metrics, we need means and innovation and financial innovations to be able to monetize. On the other hand side, we also need a fundamental paradigm shift, because actually a lot of those metrics and a lot of those financial means stem from this very anthropocentric and Newtonian mindset. And we're trying to shift the mindset. So I, for one, have a kind of a little bit of a love-hate relationship with those initiatives, but we see the groundswell building.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And as a farmer, my head is straight away thinking about the question, how do we bring all those amazing developments that you've mentioned at, let's say, systemic level to the farmer. And we'll get to that later in the conversation. So thank you for your points. Looking forward to continuing on this super rich content there. Megan, over to you right now, and moving from company side to landowner side. You are here wearing both the hat of a producer and also as a user of the Savory Institute EOV ecological outcome verification methodology that support also Savory's land to market program. Can you briefly describe those two programs and tell us about the relevance of those programs for today's agri-food sector?
Thank you so much for the introduction. Very briefly, EOV and land to market are complementary but separate. So EOV is the methodology that has been developed through the Savory Network over the past 20 years that looks at short-term and long-term indicators of change, of regeneration, that helps farmers to understand what's going on their land and be able to demonstrate that change. So when we're looking at different indicators, when we talk about short-term, these are things where we can make change in our management systems in order to improve our regeneration going forward more quickly. And then when we're talking about long-term, these are the sorts of things like carbon content in soil, where it takes much longer for change to happen, but we still want to be seeing the direction of travel of improvement. So The EOV is a verification. It's not a certification, which is important to have clear. It demonstrates the effects of what you're doing on the ground. So it is absolutely management neutral in the sense that you don't have to be a practitioner of holistic management or any other kind of school of regenerative agriculture. It just matters what you're doing and what those results are. Of course, if you are throwing at it a lot of chemicals, or you're using a lot of heavy equipment, or you're plowing up the ground, those activities are going to then show up in the results of your monitoring. So you really are wanting to be doing the best that you can for your soil to get the best impact. Now, once you have achieved the verification, EOV verification, and you can use that seal, producers are allowed to access the Land to Market program. And that Land to Market program is part of the Savory Institute's wider infrastructure initiative they created a few years ago to connect farmers to companies who are looking to include regenerative products in their supply chains. So you've got big names, like Timberland, who are, really investing in cleaning up their supply chains, going regenerative, helping farmers to transition. But there are also, SMEs, mid-sized companies who are trying to demonstrate to their consumers that they are focused on regenerative practices. So you don't have to participate in Land to Market if you have an EOV seal, but you do have to have an EOV seal to participate in Land to Market. So those are a bit of the differences in what those two programs are. We're actually hosting here at our ranch in the middle of July, the very first training for EOV monitors in the northern part of the Iberian Peninsula, which we're very excited about.
Amazing, and great to see this pathway, right? Like you need to monitor in order to access that, but you are free to do either one. And thank you for showing with an example of your farm that it's possible to work. It makes sense. Before we go to Elodie, one quick follow-up question to you, Megan, which I guess a lot of our guests here in this call might have on their mind. Savory is historically associated with animals, and is this program, ecological outcome verification, like Land to Market, only concerns animal farms and animal products? Or if I am not in that vertical, can I also participate in what Savory does?
So EOV does not require you to integrate livestock with your production. Land to Market at this time is only focused on animal-based products. So primarily things like leather, in the future, wool, those kinds of things. But so Land to Market now is meat-based, whereas EOV doesn't have to be. That's fine, depending where you are on agroforestry systems, or it could be tree fruit, or it could be olives, or what have you. But those products wouldn't be able to participate in Land to Market. So it's a different thing. And honestly, it's because there's so much demand and there's so much growth that there needs to be focus on really one vertical until the rest of us are able to catch up, and there's enough capacity to be able to service all of those growing markets. So I would just say be patient and stick with us. But we welcome people to participate in EOV, because really that's where we're trying to collect the scientific data to be demonstrating around the world with different management systems, different climates, different ecoregions, how regenerative agriculture is changing the landscapes.
Very clear once again. Thank you for the invitation to stay tuned and get engaged. Elodie, we are moving to you with our first round of questions, and you have a privilege and also big responsibility of being the manager of the speaker list for the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. we just mentioned at the beginning, is one of the key gatherings for the sector there is in Europe, which also hosts a large number of FMCG companies. We would like to ask you, like, do you see that the points mentioned by your colleagues here on this panel, by Tobias, Marine, and Megan, are already part of the conversation? And maybe if you can add, if you have that point, one point that has not been mentioned that is very much part of the conversation from your perspective, that would be great.
Yes, for sure. So maybe to put a little bit more into context, or to answer directly the question, yes, of course, these points are highly mentioned, and not only our partners, but also the ones that are participating actively into the forum are really interested into these topics. So, but to provide a little bit more outstanding information on the forum, it's a unique space in Brussels because it's opened to everyone since the very beginning. So it's free of charge for participants, and it's really focusing on agriculture and sustainability. It was founded in 2008 by previous Commissioner Franz Frischke, who was at the time responsible for agriculture and rural development, and who also worked on the CAP. And now has been taking over the chairman by Janusz Potocznik since 2015, who was the Commissioner for Environment and co-chair of the UNEP. So the idea is really to have this conversation and this bridge between agriculture and sustainability topic, and to link the two, and to have a conversation among all of the practitioners and all the actors of the agri-food supply chain. So this is transmitted as well in terms of our partners, which are not all the time members of our panel discussion, but who are reflected and actively contribute to the topic as well. So, for example, we have from the upstream of the supply chain, we have Cargill, Syngenta, but we have also representative of farmers. We have the NGOs, the Nature Conservancies, the IACN, WWF, Thought for Food, institutions of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and we have downstream, so retailers, Rewe, which is really big in Germany, and we also have fast-moving consumer goods, Nestle and PepsiCo, and startups as well. So all of these partners are really engaging in the conversation, and regenerative agriculture is a main topic. Especially Nestle, PepsiCo at the moment are really focusing on it in terms of partnership with their own farmers and within their own supply chain. This we can see at the moment. So each year, the aim of the forum is to focus on contributing towards progress of food policies and environmental policies. And actually, the theme of our previous forum was thriving on food system transformation with a focus on regenerative agriculture. So this you can have also access to all of the videos online, because everything is made public afterwards. And the idea is really to put the industry at the core, showing the responsibility of the industry in this matter and all of the opportunities that they can have. And here, not only they were proactive, but they were really contributing on different solutions that they were coming up on their side. The idea is also to put the contributions, some ideas, and to debate into which topic needs to be put more into consideration while addressing regenerative agriculture, because for the moment there are many different solutions and definitions that are available, but in terms of real practices and measurement, this is where the conversation still needs to be evolved, and all of the actors are actively willing to find answers on this matter. Even though we have a lot of consensus, we still need to go and move forward.
Thank you.
Yes.
No. Finish your point.
No problem. So we have a lot of different great example coming from the industry, that's true, but still they're really interested to be proactive, but to leverage really regenerative agriculture. The key aspect that comes in every conversation is really to put the farmer and landowners at the core of the topic, because if you do this without having the engagement of the farmers, then the topic is meant to collapse at the end. So really need to put every farmer in the center of the conversation, discussion, and implementation of the solution.
Thank you, Elodie. I couldn't agree more, and we couldn't agree more as climate farmers with what you've said, as farmer centricity is one of our key company values. You said in your remarks precisely what I want to ask Marine more about. Two very quick questions to you, Marine. What, from your perspective or Danone's perspective, is the key to success in order to build in regeneration in supply chains? And if you could give us, 30-second example of this happening, that would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll start with echoing something that Megan said and actually making it maybe even a little more provocative, but there's no such thing as a regenerative agricultural practice. The practice is not the point. The point is a shift in paradigm, a shift in the way of thinking. And so that, in my opinion, also answers your question. And I'll make it concrete. We have been working with one of our brands and are still working with one of our brands to, instead of trying to design the food product on a benchtop, and at the end of the development by a product developer, go back to the farmers or go back to the traders and say, I need 700 tons of starch. What if we were to develop a product together with the farming community and make sure that the product becomes the bounty, basically, of the farming system? And so we incorporate the system into the product. And initially, we thought that the challenge was going to be to find the right farming community. But in the end, actually, you find out that the challenge is being able to understand the system as a whole, figuring out how we work, who we work with, where we find silage, where we find first line transformation, for instance, milling, where we can hydrolyze. And so in the end, what we see and what I saw as the most powerful shift throughout that project, it wasn't actually any technical solution. It was everybody within that web, that supply web, because I don't like the name supply chain because it's too linear in my opinion, but everybody within that supply web starting to understand how interconnected everything is. And so that is, for me, what I think is most powerful, is really when we start to perceive, when we start to discern the system differently. What does that require? That requires very close relations. And that has historically not always been the case within big food. So one of the things that we need to work on is we need to get much closer to the farmers because they're our prime partners. We can't do anything without the farmer. We're not the ones to describe what needs to happen. We're the ones to support the farmer in making the shift happen.
I love it.
If I may just jump in quickly, what you've just described, Maren, is very close to holistic management, actually, because what we're looking at is managing wholes within wholes and understanding decision makers and resources and how those all fit together and work together, and then use that as a basis for decision making. So I'm very glad to see that Danone has come to that conclusion on its own. And if there are ways for us to help support that further, I'm sure that we in the Savory Institute would be happy to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Megan.
That's precisely what we want to see happen. I know the chat is very active. Please keep your questions, comments, everything going. Megan, let me follow up directly with you on what you've said. And my question, just like Marine's, would be a provocative one, which is, there are a lot of data points within ecological outcome verification. Is there the data point that is most critical in order to assess regeneration from your experience, or no, we don't have this silver bullet?
No, there's no silver bullet. It's an ecosystem. I mean, we have one ecosystem, which is the planet, right? But it's understanding how the different, we can call them ecosystem services, or how the different ecological cycles are all working together, because one is indicating something, something's indicating something else, and it's all linked. So yes, we look at carbon content in soil, we look at carbon sequestration, but in order to do that, we also need to understand biodiversity, in the soils, but also within the plant life. what kinds of insects, what kinds of bacteria, really understand what's going on there, the capacity to capture and hold water, not just capture, but how long can we keep that water as an active resource for plants to access? So there are a lot of indicators, and having been down on my knees for days at a time, digging through, trying to understand and find these different indicators for the short and long-term monitoring, it is a lot of work and it's not cheap, but it needs to be done if we're going to be able to have that data, and we're going to be able to make decisions based upon that data and be able to really finally give back to the land instead of just taking from it.
And that brings me to a question to Tobias, going deeper into this data-driven approach. Tobias, like you have been consulting from a holistic perspective for a long time, or not yet, but at the same time, it was very much data-driven. And we would like to ask you, like to share insights from that kind of double-sided approach of being holistic yet data-driven. And how do you see the role of data in transforming supply webs towards regeneration?
Yeah, data certainly plays a role. Although sometimes the effort is bigger than the benefit, specifically when it comes to data collection. So that's something we need to also keep in mind. And this is where then technology may come in, and hopefully you develop a brilliant platform as climate farmers. And there's a whole series of other startups trying this to make data collection more, 21st century alike. And so basically for us, it wasn't, as Marijn rightly said, it's regenerative agriculture is not a standard or something fixed or a practice. It's basically, I would call it a learning journey, a learning organization, a learning web of best practices and inspiring each other. And it is bloody complex. And this is basically where data helps, because from a gut feeling, sort of, we maybe feel what's right and wrong, or what sort of has a potential to be right. But to bring transparency to this complex thing, so also understand what comes towards us in terms of climate change, to use this as a basis for better argumentation towards policymakers, investors, etc., make things transparent. That's basically, I think the sort of the accelerator role in the data part of regenerative agriculture. But certainly, it's not a silver bullet. So if you put everything into data, then it's fine. And I would even also add something provocative here. We sometimes maybe should do also things which we cannot put in data yet, or which science cannot prove yet, and still it feels right. Because in the end, it's about the doing and not the knowing. So yeah.
Super rich points there. Action over discussion. I see people clapping for you, Tobias, and for all the other points mentioned. So over to LOD, and once again, building directly on what Tobias has mentioned. He mentioned one of the key words here in the discussion, which is transparency. And once again, you, LOD, have a pleasure of working with the sector and seeing what different companies are doing in that space. So can you tell us the way, ideally with one or two examples, how instilling transparency in this complex process of advancing regeneration is carried out? What is one or two success cases of being transparent, and through that advancing this paradigm shift, as Marijn and also Megan and Tobias have described?
Yes, exactly. So just to build back on the previous comment, it's true that this regenerative farming practices are so complex because it involves, as Megan mentioned, not only the soil, but also the biodiversity, the water, everything is interconnected. And hopefully each benefit from one benefits also the other. So it's also a very complex relationship within it. But we know for sure that some practices are having an indirect positive effect and positive externalities. So everything is within a chain. And once that you start doing good practices in one direction, then everything falls up after one another. It's true that we need more data collection from now on, because we have the knowledge in terms of practices. But if you want to measure, if you want to really know first and to be able to have a track of everything around years, then you need some data. And this is where the faults come in, because we don't have at the moment these data. And it's also very hard to have the data on one specific land at a specific time of the year, even though to be able to compare it with next year, because there's no, for the moment, a base to compare. There's nothing to tell you that this is the true normal for one area or one period of the year. So this is what makes it even more complex. But in terms of transparency, it's true that there is a lot of gain towards this one in terms of knowledge exchange. And here again, it's the money incentive for industry, unfortunately, because they will need to have this data to be able to certify, to track, to measure, and also to calculate in the long run and to have these benefits, to be able to assert everything. So here, this is their most incentive towards transparency in this sense, because then if you have the transition and the price premium, for example, for them, thanks to this gain, the efficiency gain they will gain over the years is only possible through transparency and how to engage farmer with them, to share the practices and to share what works best among each other. And only then the efforts will be rewarded. So this is where they have the true incentive towards transparency and exchange of knowledge, because this is where transparency is the basis for trust and better calculation for return of investment on what they are doing.
Amazing. Before we move to open Q&A, so please keep your questions coming, and this is your last chance. We have still 5-6 minutes for your questions to be in the chat. I will go around the room once again, starting with you, Elodie, building on what you've just mentioned, which is, hey, there's a lot happening, yet we have two problems with data. One is accuracy and being able to say, hey, we know with certain level of certainty this data is true, and sometimes accessing this data is difficult in itself, which is precisely where the topic of this discussion, relationship between companies and land stewards, is. So can you name like the key difficulty in making this data accessible from the farmer to other players? What from your perspective is the biggest challenge there? Or once you do it, once you open up this roadblock, it is so much easier. What is that one thing there? Elodie, over to you.
Yes. So regarding the involvement, I think there's a good conversation on how to improve further on the practices and to get the data. So we need to be proactive in this sense, and we need to share more about each other in this direction.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Megan, over to you. A quick question from a farmer perspective and or landowner perspective, which sometimes might be a different perspective. What is the key way in which, from your perspective, farmers/land stewards, I don't want to say can be helped, because it's like, you know, a little bit subordinate relationship, but let's say
supported by?
Yes, supported, or maybe not, right? Like you can share with us, hey, like this is definitely how you don't do it. So feel free to share an example like that, and also please share an example of this is how you do it. This is how we as farmers, or I as a farmer, want to be supported. This is what is missing.
Big questions. A lot is missing.
30 seconds.
30 seconds. One, we need a new cap. We need to change the Common Agriculture Policy stat, because what it does is it works against the transition towards regenerative. It locks people, farmers, into debt cycles. It locks them into having to continue with their addiction to machinery, to inputs, to chemicals, to fossil fuels, to the whole 9 yards. So first, we need a new cap. On the other hand, for those who want to help with that transition, is we need to find ways for supply chains, supply webs to support farmers by paying them what they're worth. paying them for the products, what they're worth, so that they are not reliant upon the subsidies from the European Commission or from the Farm Bill in the US. So we have to break this connection between subsidies and farmer livelihoods. If farmers are able to access markets that are providing the value that reflects the work that they're putting in for ecosystem services, as well as for the food, fiber, and fuel that they're producing, then we're going to be able to make that transition much, much faster. So one of the ways that the Savory Institute is helping to do this is through their initiative Impact Landed, which works with philanthropists and businesses to secure funds to then help push that over to farmers to help them transition, to demonstrate that they're transitioning, demonstrate that they're regenerating by supporting them through paying for their EOV monitoring processes and help them get into that road. So that's one way to help. At the end of the day, unfortunately, it does all come down to money. People need to stop spending on the newest iPhone and start paying attention to the food they're putting into their bodies and how it gets to them and how it's produced and those who are producing it for them. So I think once they understand much better that relationship, they'll begin to put more value there rather than on perhaps more luxurious, superfluous things that don't connect directly with our bodies and our health and the soil.
Love it, and thank you for systemic perspective at least 3 levels there. A lot of action for all of us. Marine, same question to you, which is thinking about the topic of our discussion, relationship between companies, landowners, farmers. What is, the key thing to do right in order to support this paradigm shift, as you've mentioned, and what is one thing that you definitely should not be doing or you mustn't be doing in order to get us there to this new reality?
Yeah, like Megan, huge challenge to answer it in 30 seconds. So I'll pick up just 2 things.
You have 33.
33, awesome. I would say the one thing that we should do, and it comes back to my point on a paradigmatic shift, is stop seeing the boundary between what is within our community and our organization and those that are outside of our community and our organization. Because as long as we have an in and an out, we will approach them differently. When we start to see that everything and everybody within the ecosystem, within the supply web is one, that includes the farmer, therefore, that will be the most significant shift. We should be looking at the farmer as if it is our family. The thing that we shouldn't be doing, to answer that question, again, a boatload of things, but the one I would pick out is be prescriptive. The thing that we shouldn't be doing is telling a farmer what to do. The thing that we should be doing is be supportive rather than prescriptive.
And on that note, before we go to Tobias, I have a call to action, which is if you haven't visited yet, please visit a farmer and start this conversation that Marine is talking about without trying to achieve anything. Just show up to the farm and say, hey, I'm here to listen to your story. Tell me about your farm, and encourage others to do that. I think this is super simple action. You are all invited to do that, but it's extremely powerful, and it is indeed the starting point, as you've mentioned, Marine. Thank you for that.
Please call ahead first.
Call ahead, yes, because we are not tour guides. We are making money, trying to make money. Tobias, over to you. Same question with a little bit more framing, which is the key thing to get right, the key thing not to do in this relationship that we are discussing. And I know you have particular experience with land banking group that might be a worth example to mention here.
Yeah, sure. I'll keep it short so we have time for questions. It's basically a new company, the Land Banking Group, where I'm a little bit involved, which is a platform, a group of experts where we basically try to to facilitate this process of bringing transparency to supply chains and allow land stewards to capitalize on their ecosystem services and link them to markets. And certainly, and I want to emphasize this, beyond carbon, so also carbon, but biodiversity and all the other things, but make the farmers not sort of slaves of data and fancy apps, but see how basically this part of, or this kind of work can be taken away from them through smart technology, let the data collection is done sort of in the background, and the farmers only have to verify it. But that's early stage. But I mean, for me, maybe, it's as I said in the beginning, if we don't crack this sort of the cheapest wins nut, then we, like a lot of sustainability effort is hot air. But we see this shift, that it's taken more serious, and we realize that specifically supported by the financial sector, that this regenerative sustainable agriculture is economically the most viable option. And this is, I think, a good accelerator.
And the scope of this land banking business that you are developing, is that Germany, is that Europe, is that specific land in Germany?
It's not me developing it. I'm just helping them a bit, just to be clear. But it's basically global. We currently start in Germany, but there is already project signed up in Namibia, in Indonesia, other places. So it's global.
Amazing. So look it up, and that brings us to your questions. I will turn over to my colleague Esther to give us first out of 2 or 3 questions that we will take. Over to you, Esther.
Thank you very much. And also thank you for everybody that has posted their questions in the chat. It's very lively again. The first question is one that was raised by 2 people, actually, Anna and Alice. We paraphrased it a little bit, and it's directed at you, Elodie. So many of the organizations involved in the conversation that you have mentioned have, like Syngenta, for example, have a historical and present business model of synthetic inputs, which in the regenerative agriculture we talk about here is not really necessary. How do you and the forum see the leadership of these companies in the space of regenerative agriculture?
Yes, thank you very much for this question. And this is also a question that has been asked to us for many times, since they were actually partners of this group. So again, the forum is a neutral space. So they come to us to express and to engage and to have conversation. If you suppress someone from having a conversation with NGOs and to find a mutual agreement, then at this point, no one is going to engage into any direction. So of course, someone has an opinion and practices on certain level, but I think it's crucial for them that they get the inspiration somewhere. And if they can get this inspiration, data, information, and feedbacks on certain things and a certain place, we are really honored to provide them with the information. And we are also always looking forward, expanding our partnerships, expanding the people we invite on stage. We are free and accessible to everyone. Everyone can contribute to our forum and provide us the information. So here again, I cannot speak in the defense of them as Syngenta. We actually do not represent them. We just offer them a space, and I hope that they can take feedback from it.
Thank you for that. And once again, this invitation to build bridges, despite the differences, which are really not that big once you start talking, and build trust that has been mentioned in our discussion, and navigate along this supply web and web of relationships cannot be emphasized enough. So despite some maybe ideological differences, make sure, or as much as you can, please speak with people who are different to you. That's why, once again, an invitation from our side to reach out to us if there is something particular that you disagree with us saying or doing, because that's where the learning is. That's where we move forward together as a community. Esther, second question from the audience.
Absolutely. So another question from Anna, now directed at Marijn. And Anna is asking, how do companies like Danone intend to help farmers transition towards regenerative agriculture when they have been encouraged or forced into taking on technology that is completely contrary to regenerative practices? In other words, all those farming families who have put all their money, credit, and effort into fulfilling the highly technological and intensive industrial requirements Danone and others have demanded up to now, what will be done to support their radical mental paradigm and on-farm change?
Yeah, so thank you for the question, and I think it's a very relevant question. There is no singular answer to it, I think, because there's so much that needs to happen and to be done. Some examples and changes that are being made, and we need many more. So I'm not presenting these as silver bullets, just as some examples, is changing, for instance, our business models and our procurement models. So moving away from buying on market prices, but moving to long-term contracts with farmers directly. That enables you to de-risk the operation. It enables the farmer to actually invest in the long term. And so it's just one example, and I'm not saying it's the example that's going to work everywhere, because there's also downsides to it, because something that was just mentioned in the chat is about diversification of what is being grown, and diversification versus long stable contracts might actually be counterintuitive. So lots of things to work through, but that shifted relationship, I think, is a good example, which also requires proximity. Then the other thing that I would mention is sending different market signals. And so the example I was just giving on building products that actually embrace that diversity, that actually show that seasonality in a product is a good thing, just like we appreciate it in high quality wines. And for some reason, when we're talking about our milk, or when we're talking about our quote unquote almond milk, we don't want that. How can we go back to actually showing that diversity throughout the seasons or from geography to geography is a positive thing? And that's where we can work together with the community to develop those, I call them often lighthouses, those examples of a different, a much more utopian possible. Then we can be there, and we have different funds and means to pilot and help finance the transition in these pilots. That being said, in the end, if we want to transition the full system and our full footprint, we are going to need the financial markets as well. We can't do that on our own. Yet, we can be at the forefront, piloting, showing that there's a different possible, and showing that this is basically an opportunity. Because we talked before in today's call about the cheap food, but the food isn't cheap today. We're just not paying the right price. And I co-authored a piece, Cities for the Circular Economy of Food, that we published at WEF in 2019. For every $1 of revenue generated in the food system, we as a society actually incur $2 in cost. So that food that we assume being cheap isn't cheap at all. And so there is also an opportunity for the financial markets. It's just where we need to show them. And as I said, I'm not a fan necessarily of measuring everything. I think metrics are highly Newtonian. That being said, they are a bridge to communicate to those that haven't made the paradigmatic shift, to show that there is a massive opportunity, and then get from a groundswell to a shift at a systemic level.
Thank you, Marijn, and I'm sorry for pronouncing your name not the right way throughout the duration of the session. And thank you, Esther, for the tip at the end, and great points there. What is our third and final question from the audience?
Yes, final question from the audience comes from Morris, who would like to know what the role is for carbon credits in accelerating a fair net zero world. So what is the role of carbon credits in this whole thing?
Who would like to take that? Tobias, Megan?
We want to talk about how to make carbon credits work for farmers. This is where it's actually really tricky. I mean, if you're looking at a market's perspective of creating a trading system, of creating a contract that is something that could potentially create liquidity that there would be demand for, that's one thing. The other thing is how to actually connect that to the ground, to the farmers, so that one, they're able to get that access to that cash, and two, whoever's buying that credit is actually getting something of value that means something to decarbonize their supply chain or their supply web. One of the reasons why EOV does not participate in carbon credits at this point is because carbon markets are not yet developed sufficiently to work so that farmers aren't setting themselves up to fail. Because if you're seeing some of the programs that are coming out, you're talking about, forward selling carbon emissions for 10 years out. But that's not how soil works. That's not how farming works. And so it's impossible for a farmer to be able to guarantee that they will continue to sequester more carbon a decade out, or even a couple of years out at the rate that they're doing now. So what they're doing is they're setting themselves up for an even bigger risk. What happens if they sell a carbon credit, a company buys it, then the metrics show that 7 or 8 years down the line, it hasn't been at the rate that they have sold it. Then what you've got is a farmer who's then has to give that money back. I mean, how does that work? So I think there's still a lot of development that needs to be done in terms of how carbon markets work, so that the farmers are getting the benefits, so that they're getting the access to the financial resources required in order to transition to regenerative practices, but in a way that's not going to make them, put them in a worse position a few years down the line than they're already in.
Thank you, Megan. And this is the very question we are navigating as climate farmers, with support of our numerous partners, official, unofficial. All of you are counted in that group, our dear panelists, and also the audience. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for all your questions. As mentioned at the very beginning, the recording of the session will be up on YouTube tomorrow. It will be delivered to your inbox next week. You are already warmly invited to the next think tank session. When the date of that think tank session is announced, you will be informed once again via our social media channels and via a mailer. And with that, we will be closing this session. I would like to give 30 seconds to each of our panelists to share a key thought or ask for action, at which point, after the last panelist goes, I will remain silent and will finish there. So thank you once again, and over to Elodie, then Megan, then Tobias, and then Marijn.
Yes, thank you very much, Climate Farmer, for the opportunity again and to creating this debate. I think the question of regenerative agriculture and the transition will remain a topic for discussion again in the long run, but I hope with all the synergy created at the moment that we'll aim towards consensus at some point, or continue to preach so good practices and to create synergy among all of the topics that we want to preserve for a healthy food production in the long run.
Megan?
Thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity to exchange views with these fantastic colleagues who I otherwise wouldn't have had an opportunity to meet. So really very much appreciate that. I think what we really need to be working on is creating community, and within that community, understanding the different needs, the different challenges of the different actors within the supply web, how it works for farmers, how it works for companies, how it works for consumers. And I would very much ask that those participating and those who are going to watch in the future, the next time they go to the supermarket and they go to buy their food, they think about, just for a minute, where it came from, who produced it, and how. Thank you.
Very clear. Thank you. Tobias?
Yeah, two quick things. I had always a pleasure of traveling a lot and visit all farmers in different countries, regions, growing different crops. And actually, I have seen much more great things than not so great things. So I know there's a lot of things going wrong, but I just want to also bring this message of hope. There is, like, many farmers doing it pretty well, and we just need to share that with others, and specifically small-scale farmers do it right, and we need to bring that story of hope also to others, of best practice. And secondly, as an expert community, yeah, let's really focus on what we agree upon and do that, and then if we still have time left, then we can discuss where we disagree about, but we don't have time to discuss all the things we disagree.
Love it. Visit the farmer, in other words, and do a lot of other things, but start with the farm visit. Marijn, over to you, and that's it.
Yeah, so I talked a lot about paradigm shifts today. I talked a lot about systems today. it might be difficult to accept them, sometimes daunting when you think about the world as a complex adaptive system, that there is no such thing as an expert. There's no such thing as a best practice. There is no such thing as predicting which innovation, which change is going to shift the system. What I want to offer to everybody is that that is also actually what makes these systems and the system we live in, our ecosystem, so beautiful. Because it also means that every innovation might be the one. And so each and every one of us has the power to simply start trying things differently. And big systems don't change through scale. They don't change at the seat of power. They simply change by experimenting more. And so I would like to ask everybody to try to look at the system, understand the system, and simply experiment with it, because we together have the power to shift it.
Dankjewel. Thank you all.